For our next project, we're going to do a platter. This is still face grain, like the bowls, so we'll be using some of the same cuts that we learned on the bowls. We'll be expanding out on some of those cuts and learning some new things as we go on this. We'll be learning a little bit of design. We're going to change the way that we hold this. With the bowls, we held in compression. We're going to hold in expansion, but we're going to use a very large set of jaws to give us a very secure hold. And I'm going to show you a couple of tips and tricks along the way so that'll help. And it doesn't need to be very deep. If you notice, this is less than 1/8 of an inch deep. And it is quite secure the way that I will mount this. I've got a piece of ash, 12 by 12 by 2 inches. I've got a bark inclusion right here on this piece. When I look here, my growth rings are really tight right here. This is the first slab off of the pith of this tree. So the heart center was right in here, and I've got the first set. This is the second most stable blank that I could get off of this piece, off of this log. The most stable blank would be with the heart center here, would be a half blank here without the heart center in it. That would be a quarter sawn blank. This is a plain sawn or a flat sawn blank, and it's the first one off. The further I get out on width and closer to the bark, the more this is going to want to move and cup as it dries. I do want a dry piece of wood for this project. Back to the bark inclusion, I see it here. It does not come through on the back side on there, so I know whatever in there is not very deep. So I'm going to take a chance of putting the rim here and hoping that that turns away very quickly. So I'll drill my center point here, and that'll leave this surface as the bottom or the back of my platter. I'm going to mount to my screw center chuck, just like we did before. So I have my drill bit. The stop's very important on this one. With the bowl, I could have ran a little bit deep. On the platter, I don't have a lot of wood here. I don't want to risk running that drill bit in any deeper than I need to. Same thing if you were applying a face plate here. You don't want to use any longer screws than you've got to mount this. So I've drilled my hole, and we're ready to mount this piece onto the lathe. As I mount this blank, about 300 to 400 RPM, I'm 350 there. Again, just like everything else, let the lathe take it out of my hands. I don't try and stop the lathe. Then I'm going to tighten that up a little bit. Make sure it's secure on that screw center chuck. I do want my revolving center. There, and that's going to help stabilize this piece of wood where I'm so far out from that chuck. Where this piece of wood is very thin, I need to know exactly how much I have to work with for design. So true this surface up here, then this surface, before I come back and work on the foot. I don't start on the foot and just start moving wood out of this, because I'll end up with a shape I'm not happy with. So my first cut to true up the rim, I'm going to bring my tool rest in this area here, which is that I can work on this face. I'm going to start with my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Speed, let's talk about our speed, 12 inches in diameter. If I go back to the formula that we've discussed all along here, the diameter times the RPM of the lathe, I shouldn't be above 900 RPM on this piece. I want to keep it down fairly low, because we're talking rim speed. As I make this cut, remember the red line we've got in the bottom of this gouge. I'm going to roll that all the way over, close the flute, and then drop the handle. Come in, anchor my left hand down to the rest and the tool down to the rest, and just skim that surface. Now I don't need to skim all of this surface, only out here at the edge where my rim will be. And I want to make certain that that is running true. So that I know how high I can work. That surface is now cut clean. I can move my tool rest. And I'm going to cut the diameter. I'm still working with standard tool rest heights. I'm going to make this cut, again with my 1/2 inch bowl gouge, starting at the top of the platter and working to the bottom. As I get to the bottom of this cut, I may have some fibers want to spring out or blow out of the back, but that surface will be turned away later. And that's why I'm running this cut that direction rather than coming from the bottom up. If I come from the bottom up, the fibers I blow out would be in the rim. Bevel pointed in the direction I want to cut. Flute slightly open or completely closed to start is even better. Get on your bevel. Drop your handle, open up the flute. There's those torn out fibers I talked about, and they're on the bottom where they don't matter. Before I proceed, I want to look at this surface. I want to make certain that it's cut clean. If it's not cut clean, and I could be a little bit cleaner, plus I've got still some of the edge right there from where this was taken out of the board. So I'm going to switch to my 3/8 flute. Smaller gouge typically cuts cleaner. This also has a fresh edge on it. It's just off the grinding wheel. Get that entry, and I'm going to travel slow across here, at least slower than normal, and let that tool have time to cut. Check that surface, make sure it's cut clean and smooth. Get out my smoothometer. Yeah, got that almost as smooth as my smoothometer. I want to true this surface up next, so I'm going to move my tool rest around to the back of the piece. I need a little bit more room. So I'll move the tailstock out of the way and set my rest. Standard tool rest height. Make sure everything's moving free and clear. Back to my 1/2 inch flute bowl gouge. The cut that I'm going to do across the bottom to true this surface up is the identical cut that I did on the rim. It's just, I'm using the gouge in a 180-degree different location. So flute closed, handle down. If I'm really uneven, I'm going to step. This is pretty close. I'm just going to drag that across and do almost a shear scrape. Now on the platter I showed you, there's a nice soft ogee curve and a fairly large foot. A platter or a plate, something that's usually going to be used for service, you want a nice big base on it. A bowl, like we did earlier, a nice utilitarian bowl, I need a foot that's about 30 to 40%. If it gets much smaller than 30%, they get a little tippy. 30 to 40, they're fairly stable. I want 50 to 70% on a platter. The lower your piece gets, the wider you can get on the bottom. The more it lifts and the more lift you want on it, the smaller you want that foot to get. So I'm going to go, I know my chuck jaws are going to be about 5 inches, so I'm just going to put a mark about 2.5 inches here, and then I'm going to go just a shy of 7 inches, which is another inch out, and give me a rough idea of where I'm working to on that area. My next measurement is going to be a do not pass line, and that's going to come off of the top of the blank down 1/2 inch, and that's a guide for where I don't want to cross. Whatever I do in my shape, I want to do it back here. Now when I measure this, I have 1.5 inches. I'm going to come in that same distance, 1.5 inches. Now between those two areas, I'll start to shape this ogee curve. Still using my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. My speed still at about 900 RPM. And take note that we didn't grab our spindle roughing gouge to rough this bowl blank out, or this platter blank out. It's face grain, so we're using our bowl gouges. Handle down, flute closed over, left hand on the rest, right hand on the handle's on the hip. I can then start to shape a cove. I don't want to go past that 1.5 inch line on either side. I don't have to come all the way up to that 1/2 inch line, but I don't want to go past it. I'm a little shy on that 1/2 inch part on both sides, that 1/2 inch or 1.5 inch mark on both sides. I'm going to tuck my rest in a little tighter and come in and start working this area here. I want this piece to have a foot that lifts about 1/4 inch, so I'll cut that lift into here right now. So now as I look at this ogee curve, I've got my foot ring started here, and I've got my cove here. This has got a very harsh transition in that bead. So I want to soften that up. Now, anytime you're working with ogee curves, they tend to look better stretched out rather than compressed. This is more of a compressed line here. It's flat at this point, it's straight through here, kicks out. I want to stretch that out. I don't have room to do that, so when I say stretch it out, what I'm really saying is I want to flatten this up and smooth it out. Starting to shape up, look a lot nicer. I'm liking that curve, and I'm taking a second and looking at it and see how it goes. I'll put a little cove right down here on the foot ring eventually. Now, I didn't cross that ½ inch line. In fact, I'm 1/4 of an inch away from that. So I've got 3/4 of an inch here. That's way too thick, but I'm happy with this curve. So I'll take the wood off the top of this platter down to wherever I want my thickness to be. Just because I have that thick of a blank doesn't mean I have to use it. The shape is far more important than figure or color of the wood. Figure and the color will always change. The shape you're stuck with. If you can't take that piece of wood and spray it black or spray it white and have a good shape, it won't withstand the test of time. And from what one good friend of mine told me, it's no fun to show up to your brother's house when he's having a yard sale and find your turnings out in the yard. From this point, I'm fairly happy with that. Let's come in and start looking at getting our recess developed for our chuck. So I'm going to move my tailstock out of the way. It's done its job now. I have a Vicmark 5½ inch chuck with 5-inch jaws. I've got an 1/8 of an inch gap between my jaws, and I'm going to take and measure across, and that is just under 5 inches on this chuck, or 125 mil. So if I double check my line, now that I've got the revolving center out, 2½ inches from center. So that line was a little bit wider than I needed to be. I'm going to use my 3/8 bowl gouge. Start from that 5-inch line, come in, anchor to the rest, find my bevel, pick up the cut, and I'm going for a depth that just removes that center mark. Need to go one more pass. Then the next pass comes from the center out to just about to the 5-inch mark. And it's basically, I want it to come flat across. I don't need to get the depth, any more depth than I've got. You hear it hitting into that end grain. Doesn't really like to cut that direction. This surface I can't mount to. It's the wrong shape. So I've got a couple of choices. I'll get rid of that stringy fiber on there. I can come in with my skew and cut into that, and I prefer to use my spindle gouge. It's a little bit riskier, but it cuts cleaner. .3/8 spindle gouge. Start with the flute closed. Let that bevel get in there. Slight dovetail. Come back and clean up the ridge. If you want to go with the safe bet on the tooling and avoid the skid, go with the skew and just gently slide down that wall. The drawback with the skew over the spindle gouge is it typically is not going to cut this surface as clean. It'll tear out some of those end grain fibers, and there's no way I can get in there and sand that surface. So I want that cut clean. Before I go any further, I want to make certain my chuck will fit. I've got lots of room. And so I've got my chuck in there, my chuck's being held in secure, and I've got room between my jaws that my calipers, my double-ended calipers, will be able to fit in there. Now that I have my spigot established, I'm going to check with a straight edge, and I want to make certain that I'm lower here than I am out here. Right now this surface is flat. I'm going to slightly angle it in a little bit, so I only sit out at the outer rim. .3/8 bowl gouge, bevel riding cut. Just a slight skim cut. Double check I didn't remove anything from that outside. Now I'm going to come along with a push cut and get the very best surface that I can out here before I start to sand. I've got my tool rest set up. It's going to start close, end close, so it's about a 45, it's running parallel to the ogee. I'm going to soften this up with a cove. And I could continue that shear scrape all the way around, but I'm going to opt for a push cut. Come in, get on the bevel, try and stay just under that shape, about a 1/16 of an inch deep. My left hand holds the tool down to the rest. The right hand steers. And I'm using my legs as much as possible to guide this. I've kind of locked my body into a position. And I'm trying not to move small muscles. I'm trying to move with large muscle groups. So as I move this tool around, my hips move and I change the way my body supports. I shift my weight from foot to foot. Now as I was coming across on there, about midpoint, the tool just quit cutting, and I had to give it a little oomph. There's a white patch right there. I don't know what's caused it, but that's right where it was. That tells me there's probably some kind of mineral in here, whether it's came from rainwater down or from the ground up, but there's something there that took the edge off my tool. And that tool, I didn't have to push it to cut, I follow it. Once I hit that point, I had to apply a little pressure. That tool needs to go back to the grinder. Anytime you have to push that tool, there's a problem. Anytime you have the question, is my tool sharp? The answer is always no. If the question is, do I need to sharpen my tool? The answer is always yes. You'll never get those to where, the more you sharpen them, the happier you'll be. The cleaner you cut, the less sandpaper you buy. So that tool does need to go to the grinder again. Move everything out of the way as we sand. On a piece this large, I don't want to use my 2-inch disc. I want to use my 3-inch disc. So I'm going to change my disc holder from my 2 to my 3. You know what? I'll use a 3 anytime I can, and I prefer it over a 2, quite simply because I get 100% more paper for 30% or so more cost. So mathematically, it just works out. I've got 2 sets of abrasives with me, so I was separating those. I'm going to start with a 120. Look and see if I've got any torn grain or any issues I need to deal with. I've got one right there in the center, kind of tore up. Touch that with the lathe off. And I'm going to coat this with a little wax to keep the dust down. Okay, now I'm going to bring my speed up to about 500 RPM at max because I was a 900 top end. I'm only at 400. That seems plenty fast for this. I'm not going to worry too much about getting 120 grit inside of there. I'm working the 3 o'clock position on the foot, and I want to work the 3 o'clock position on the mandrel. The wood's coming up right there. The mandrel, the sandpaper's going down. As I come over to this side, I need to reverse my drill. I've got 2 little compression marks right there as I came around with that push cut, and those are from the bevel of my gouge, pushing those fibers in. I need to make sure that I get those sanded out, and if they don't come right out, which looks like they may not, I'm going to stop and see if I need to spot sand those areas. And they're coming in, they're right there. So with the lathe off, I'm going to spot sand that area. Same place on the other side. And then blend the 2 surfaces together. Go from 120 to 180. And there's an old saying amongst wood turners. It was started by Vic Woods, an Australian turner, and it is treat your sandpaper like somebody else buys it for you. In other words, don't use dull paper. Paper's like any other cutting tool. It wears out, it goes dull. Once it's dull, it's no good. You're just generating heat. That could cause a heat check on your end grain. It's causing you more work and taking more time. You need to change your paper out when that happens. See, it didn't take me long. I've still got one tool mark in there on that. Didn't take me long with 180 grit to shape that foot up, or that spigot up. You notice I'm not sanding out here yet. Years ago, I was doing a hands-on class in a guy's shop. And I had told the students that same quote from Vic Woods, and don't use sandpaper like somebody else buys it. A little later in the day, I look over in the corner, and one of the guys is sanding for about 10 seconds and then taking the disc off, getting another one, same grit, and sanding for a little bit more. And I walked over and I says, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, you said use it like somebody else was buying it, and it's that guy's shop." So he took it a little literal, that he was working with very sharp papers all the time. He's just going through a lot of money. Be careful you don't spend a lot of time on that dead center. It's very easy to dish that in. Reverse your drill as you come up to the outside. I've got to spend a little bit more time out here. I've got a lot more surface coming around. And there's 400 grit. Okay, I want to check two things. One, take my straight edge and make sure certain that the only point that's touching is the outer edge. That's still good. Two, confirm I didn't lose the hold on my chuck. I want to make sure it still bites. For how I'm going to turn this around and hold it, that'll be enough purchase to get that. If I can't just easily pop that chuck out of there, I'm good. One more coat of scratch free. This one will buff in. I'm going to first buff that in with a towel and turn that on. Sanding speed's a good place to start. Increase it if you need to. Get some right down in the corner there. We're ready to take this off the screw center, turn it around, mount it onto the chuck, and hollow out the inside next. Platter comes off of the screw center faceplate. Screw center faceplate off the spindle using my Tommy bar. I like to cradle the scroll chuck and then turn the hand wheel. A lot less likely to cross thread, I believe. I'm going to line my grain up with my chuck jaws. And when I say that, I'm talking about the opening in the jaws so that I'm pushing out on equal pressures. It's all biased grain where those jaws are pushing. Tighten the chuck as I go around. Take the slop out of those jaws. I am going to use the tailstock here as long as I possibly can. Now, I know I've got a lot of wood here, and I want to thin that down to about 3/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch on the rim. And I want to decide what I want to do rim-wise. So I'm going to make that decision early on. So I've got a couple of choices here. I've got just a plain simple rim and into a shallow bowl, or I've got a shallow bowl and a little detailed fillet in here. So I've got a bead going into a fillet and then a cove, shallow cove going across. I think we'll do one like this one here, the second one, today. I'm going to start with my 1/2 inch bowl gouge. Bring my speed up from minimum. This backside should be running very true. If it's not, you're not set flat into your chuck jaws, and you need to reset that and get it so that it is running true. This is the same cut, even though I'm on the top of the piece. This is the same cut that I worked on the back side of the piece, the pill cut, or the shearing pill cut. Handle down, flute slightly open. And just swing that handle a bit and leverage that in. Just thinking back to when I did the inside or the outside of this, and I lost my edge, and I'm wondering if it has something to do with this bark inclusion as I get in there. We'll watch that. That may be where I've got that, because it is in line with some of those white spots. I'm putting quite a bit of pressure down into the tool rest. I've got a firm grip on the handle, and I'm using my hip to swing that cut through. Large muscle groups lets me be very aggressive without putting out a lot of energy. The tailstock also, without tailstock, there's no way I'd want to put that much pressure out on a rim like this. Come back, I can pick up a push cut. You want to watch as you come up close to this that you don't pick up a flute full of end grain. That's where you're going to get your catch. You can already, that's where the wood's tearing out. If I pick up that entire width of that, that's going to be a catch. So I'm going to stop just shy of getting that catch. I'm filling the rim. Right now it feels a little thick here. It's cutting clean, but I am going to drop back to my 3/8. So I've got my 3/8 flute bowl gouge freshly sharpened. Come in, make a cut, see if it should cut as clean or cleaner, but I want to get a little bit more depth and turn in there just a little quicker. I'm trying to get a little closer to the outside shape on this rim. Let's stop just shy of picking up that extra cut. Check and feel that shape. If it doesn't feel right, it's not right. Now I've got torn grain here. I don't want to have that in my finished piece on that fillet. So I'm going to turn the tool over. And cut back the other direction. Again, stop before you get that wing all tied up in there. So that surface there is now cut clean. Got just a little fuzzy right there. I'm cut clean into that groove. I'm going to switch back to my 1/2" gouge for bulk removal. Continue that same cut. I'm going to stop with about 1/4 inch. That was starting to give me a little bounce. And when I get that bounce, it starts to chip things out. So I've stopped thicker than I want to end up so that I can come back through and clean that surface up. And I could just see that bark inclusion doesn't look like it's going to end up in the finished piece. Now this cut seems fairly unorthodox because I'm cutting from the center, kind of the center down in, but I'm not starting at the center of the piece and pulling sideways into the end grain. I'm cutting with that peel cut, and it's all side grain here. Absolutely, at no time do you bring that in and then pull that back. When you pull that wing back, that becomes a self-feeding cut, and when you get into the end grain, it's going to catch, and that'll be a problem. This tear out in here, where I've got all that fuzzy, that's nothing to worry about. That's going to go away. My bark inclusion has gone away. Continue to make a couple more cuts. Bevel riding cut with the 1/2" gouge from the rim towards the center. See me tip my head out? I'm looking to see where my depth is. How much wood have I got? I believe I've got plenty. Even though I haven't put a caliper on there. Now I've got enough of a gap between my chuck jaws that I can reach right into that low point in the spigot with my caliper. That still says I've got a 1/2 inch, so I want to remove at least a 1/4 inch at this point here. So I've still got wood to take out of there. I've got a couple of spots that are chipped out on the end grain where that tool bounced. We'll switch over to our 3/8 gouge to cut that clean. But before we do, I want to introduce a new tool to you. And I've got wood here to practice with, and so let's practice with that. The tool I want to introduce is the bottoming gouge, or a traditional ground gouge. By traditional, this is the way that the old bowl turners originally used to grind this. Square across with a short bevel. Later, they put the fingernail grind on, and we found it was much more versatile. But when it comes to working straight into this end grain fiber and across the bottom of bowls and platters, nothing beats this tool. One of the problems that having this ground square across presents is getting an entry cut. It's very difficult to get an entry cut because my bottom wing is pointed in the direction I don't want to go, not in the direction I want to go. So I'm going to start just inside that surface there and get the bevel first.
Keep your hand underneath if possible.
Anchor, bevel, pick up the cut. Now I've got the flute presented at about the same angle that I would a fingernail grind. Stop just before that corner hits. Just like the spindle roughing gouge, I can work anywhere on this tool that I am supported by the tool rest. And by that, I can roll this back onto its back, and I get more of a shear to the tool. A lot of turners are afraid that having that square wing is going to dig in. You saw I put that flute straight up in the air, the most dangerous position, and at that tip's not that close. But the best cut with this tool always tends to be turn that flute upside down. Look at how beautiful those shavings are coming off of that. What you lose is you don't see the cutting going on. You see what happened. You don't see what it's doing. It's just that visual. Once you learn the feel of the tool, you can do that. Turn that upside down like that. That's leaving me a very, very nice finish on that. So now I want to drop back, pick up my, well, before I do that, let's just quickly check and see how much wood I've still got left in there. 3/8 of an inch. So I've still got plenty of wood. I'm going to pick up my 3/8 gouge and start to develop, get that fillet cleaned up. Take a quick look and make sure that's where I want it. How does it feel? Feels all right. I want to get about 1/8 of an inch deeper in the center from that point right there. I'm going to go back to my traditional. Kick that upside down. One thing about it, where I've got it in this position, if you overload it, too heavy of a cut, there's no cutting edge there to grab. It'll just stop. Looks like I'm about on target for depth. And there I've ran out of wood I can cut. How does that feel? That curve's feeling good coming across there. And that traditional gouge or that bottoming gouge has left that just as smooth as could be. Check my thickness one more time. Heavy quarter, maybe 5/16, I'm fine with that. Rims maybe just a touch heavy. Check it. It's flexing a little bit, but I think I can get away with it. I'm going to drop the handle, close the flute. And shear scrape. If you pick up any indication of chatter, stop. And don't come in with a heavy scraper and try and think you can do that. That's a very delicate cut right there to try that. Now, I'm going to come in, remove a little bit more of the bulk from the center. It's a good idea before you go all the way and bust that out or cut it out. Remove your tailstock and just double check that you still have a good hold on that spigot. If you're using smaller jaws because you haven't got a larger set of jaws yet, sometimes with those heavy cuts, the chuck will spin in the spigot. Or if you've expanded your jaws out too far. As always, remove your revolving center so you don't put a mark in your hand. Tuck my rest in just a little bit further. Gonna lower my rest. Back to my traditional, anchor, bevel, cut. Now I've lowered the rest so that I pick up that shear angle right here at the tip. I don't want to be up flat on it. There I didn't have my bevel, that wing kit, and that's the indication that you're not on the bevel. I caught that wing and it wants to push me onto the bevel. So when you're using this and you're getting a little buck, most likely you're pushing with the left hand and you came off the bevel. Feel that curve. That's acceptable to me. Got just a little torn grain right on the end when I push that a little hard and pluck that out. We're now ready to sand. All right, let's talk about sanding this side a little bit. Now, I've been starting with 120 grit, and that's coarse enough to get through the tool marks that I've left and any torn grain. If you need to go coarser, go coarser. I typically want to start with a coarser grit than I think I need. So while this is cut smooth, I could probably start sanding at 220. But it'll take me much longer to get through 220 to where I can move on to my next grit than it does to start with a coarser grit, get the job done, and then move through. Again, to help keep the dust down, I'm going to wax this up. Think back on this project. The second cut I made was the cut where I started at the rim of the bowl, or the rim of the platter, and worked towards the tailstock. And I cut the diameter, and I made sure I had that cut clean. I've not touched that since. I've still got my pencil lines on there. When I get up to 220 grit, I'll show you, and I'll slightly round that. But that's why it was so important that I had that cut clean. Work that wax in a bit. Get my sander. Same bit of abrasives. Reduce my speed. Right here, the wood's coming up. I'm going to use this portion of the disc, which is going down. Now, right there, there's a little shinier ring running around. It's shinier than the others. To the side of it, I can see I've been sanding them. I'm looking to get that even surface coming across there, so I know I'm just slightly lower on there. And I've got a lot of that disc on that surface. I'm not digging in with that. I've got a lot of it down in there. I only come up to the center point. I don't wash past the center point. On the rim out here, it's more comfortable over here. So I reverse my drill. Now as I look right here, I've got a little bit of a shadow line, but as I look to the other side, I can see just inside of that, I've got a little bit of a groove. So I spend a little bit of extra time, make sure that I'm not working, the shadow is a shadow. Then I've taken my sandpaper off, folded it, and got right into the corner and sanded that detail. Next grit, 180. Just flow that around that curve. Got another little line right there. I need to spend a little bit more time. To get that. Now this drill is a 0 to 1400 RPM drill, and I'm only using about half of that. If you're on a regular drill, you don't need all that speed. So speed doesn't get you there any quicker. It generates heat quicker. And I'm not forcing this in. If you look, my discs are not really compressing my foam backing. It's a light touch. Sanders work best, and sandpaper works best when it grazes over that surface, not when it's forced into it. And especially a wood like this ash. I've got a very open grain between the spring wood and the summer wood. If I force that disc in there or over sand that, I'll ripple this. It's all right if that's the texture you want, but I'm not looking for that texture right now. If you're having trouble getting the pressure right that you should be using, you can buy a really soft interface pad. It's a very open cell foam. You shouldn't be compressing that foam. Now, as I get towards the center, on here I'm up to 220 grit. I'm going to spend just a little bit of time, keep that disc flat. I don't want to cover that. I'll dish that out every single time. Keep the disc as flat as you can in that curve. And don't sit and wash back and spend a lot of time on the center. I mentioned earlier that I wouldn't sand this surface till I got to 220 grit. Right now it's straight. I don't want a straight line on this piece. Everything else is a curve. So I'm going to come in, tuck this sandpaper or sanding disc up underneath, get my speed going the right way, and I'm going to round that surface with 220 grit. You still see my pencil line. Now, you should also, and I would be wearing a good dust mask. I have a powered respirator that I typically wear when I'm in my own shop and working. I can't do that when I'm teaching. I need to project my voice. I've still got a little pencil line here. Don't want that in my finished piece. Spot sand that pencil line. But you should always wear your dust mask. Have your dust collection rolling. I'm using wax to help keep that cut down, because I don't have the dust collection in here. This is 400 grit. Blend that around. Every grit gets put into that corner. Soften those two edges. Again, should be nice, crisp, but not sharp. If it's sharp, you don't want to touch it. Wood wants to be held, it wants to be caressed. So you want to make sure that you leave it like that so that it can be caressed. Polish that wax out. That should leave us with a really nice sheen. Either leave that as a utilitarian finish. Could add walnut oil, mineral oil, vegetable oils afterwards, or go to a hardened finish like an oil varnish, like Waterlock's General Finish Salad Bowl oil. So we've got a nice ash platter here, all ready to go, be used. It'll look a lot better with chocolate chip cookies on it. I need volunteers there. Now what we've learned is holding in an expansion, cutting a dovetail for that, and not very deep, and being able to safely turn the inside using a peel cut, and then coming in and cleaning up with the traditional or the bottoming gouge. We've also learned several design things along the way.